All right, it's Monday, April 19th, 2021, and it is approximately 11:17 a.m. Just want to tell people who you are and what you do.
Good morning. I'm Eric Bain. I'm a criminal defense attorney in Minneapolis and the owner of Bain Law.
Okay. And we're here today, obviously, to discuss the Derek Chauvin trial. It's closing arguments today, closing statements. And then, how soon do you think we should expect a verdict?
It's a good question. It's possible we could receive one today. I think it's unlikely, but it's certainly within the realm of possibility.
How does that happen? If they just do closing statements, then?
They do closing statements, and then they get the instructions. They go back to deliberate, and they select a foreperson. They talk about it. They usually take a quick vote about where the jurors are at on this. If they all agree right away on everything, it could be done. Again, I think that's unlikely to happen. They also kind of just want to get settled in. They need to introduce themselves to each other, talk about it a little bit. So maybe later this afternoon, but my prediction is probably Tuesday or Wednesday.
Okay, tomorrow or Wednesday.
Yeah.
And for you, has the trial been status quo, just business as usual, just your run-of-the-mill trial, or has this been entirely different, just from what you're seeing from a legal standpoint?
Yeah, this trial is extraordinary on a lot of different measures. Number one, it's a police-involved homicide case that didn't involve a gun. Most of the time it involves a gun.
Sure. Yeah.
So this one is completely different and unlike a lot of other cases. It's also being live streamed around the world. That's more probably COVID related than anything else, but it's fascinating because we get to watch the whole thing. Cameras in the courtrooms are not a thing in Minnesota, but it is for this one case. And so anyone, anywhere can just tune in and watch certain parts of the case. They can watch arguments by the lawyers or testimony from the witnesses and tune in. I live in Minneapolis. I practice in Minneapolis primarily. We're about 2 blocks from the government center right now. So it's also just fascinating that it's in our backyard, that a trial with this level of publicity is in our backyard. It's also the tragedy of it as well, that this horrible event happened in our backyard, and we're watching it all play out in our backyard.
Yeah, it's for lack of a better term, I would say intimate, personal. It's obviously close to home. It is in home. It's here. It being live, you mentioned that. I talked to an attorney about the live streaming of it, and this particular attorney said, "Wow, you really don't know what they would say there if it wasn't live streamed or recorded." Do you believe that it being recorded is affecting the way that some of the attorneys are operating in there because they know the world is watching?
I think so, and I think that definitely impacts things. On the one hand, you got to remember every court hearing, every trial is transcribed. So there's a court reporter typing everything up. There's always a record to refer back to. So attorneys always know that everything they're saying is being recorded in some regard, but a camera in the courtroom is completely different.
Yeah, if I text you good morning, it's different than good morning. There's cadence and context to it.
And body language, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely. And so it's completely different. And the lawyers, I think, are aware of that.
Yeah.
And in a sense, I'd say more so the prosecution has 2 audiences. They have the jury, but they also have public opinion too. They're representing the state of Minnesota, They're representing the people. They're supposed to, at least. And so they care very much about what public perception is. Eric Nelson, he really doesn't care too much what public perception is. He doesn't have to. He has one client, and that is Derek Chauvin.
But you also said that Eric Nelson is possibly a client himself because he needs to be as likable or he needs to create this this feeling around Derek as much as he does himself, correct?
To an extent, yeah. The only audience he cares about is the jury, right?
Yeah.
And he only has one client, Derek Chauvin. And you're right, he does have to be likable in the sense that the jury is judging him almost as much as they're judging Derek Chauvin.
Yeah.
So if he goes in there and he acts too, aggressive or rude or whatever that turns off the jury could take that out on his client.
Yeah, exactly. And so what we've seen leading up, there was the kind of the standoff with Donald Williams. there's been several moments where, Eric has looked like a fish out of water a little bit. How have you felt about his performance thus far? And people watching obviously have, and I have my own opinions about Eric Nelson. But for you, from a legal standpoint, how do you feel he's done?
Yeah, I just want to say, as a fellow criminal defense attorney in the same community as Eric Nelson, I don't want to criticize. I don't want to, armchair quarterback anything.
Yeah.
It's not my case, and he knows it far better than I do.
Yeah.
What I think is, frankly, he's been dealt a tough hand. And any lawyer you have to play the hand you're dealt to the best of your abilities. But if you have crappy cards, there's only so much you can do with it. And so I think, given the hand he's been dealt, he's doing about the best he can. That being said, he knows the case far better than I do. And I think that we'll see what happens. Closing arguments are today. We'll see what ultimately happens.
You referring to it as a crappy hand, do some lawyers just stay away from these cases? Like, I don't want to touch this at all, I'm out of here.
Yeah, sometimes. Okay. Absolutely. Look, every criminal defense attorney at some time in their career, and maybe even on a monthly basis, is going to represent people that are unlikable, that have done horrible things, And I've certainly represented people that have done horrible things. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't try hard, that they shouldn't be given a fair trial, that they should be given their day in court. That being said, most criminal defense attorneys get to kind of pick and choose the cases they want to take on. Okay? Public defenders, different story. They take the cases that they're assigned.
Yeah.
Eric Nelson is on a panel of attorneys that represents police, and they're paid for by the police union.
Okay.
And they just kind of cycle through.
Okay.
So
he didn't really have a choice, or did he?
He made a choice to, throw his hat in the ring to be on this panel of attorneys. I think there's 10 or 12 attorneys that are on this panel. So he made a choice to do that. But my understanding is he was just up next to get the Chauvin case.
Okay.
And that's kind of how he got it.
Okay.
The three other officers are represented by other lawyers on the panel too, and I guess it just kind of came up that those other attorneys represent those other officers.
Oh, there he is. You said last week there was some pivotal events that happened, I guess, like 2 weeks ago or 10 days ago. What was it you were seeing in the trial that was really standing out to you?
Yeah, there have been a couple of different phases of the trial. One of the first phases I think was really emotionally powerful, and that was testimony from the bystanders. I think we all saw on full display the trauma that they felt from seeing it, which hearing it in their own words was impactful and emotional for everybody. The next phase of the trial was primarily about medical evidence and medical experts dealing with, respiration and drugs and things like that. That was not nearly as emotional and far more logical, rational, scientific as it should be, right?
Yeah.
But that is where the crux of the case really lies, I think.
And that's where Eric Nelson was kind of deriving his case from, correct?
Yeah, big time. Because the medical report from Dr. Baker, didn't really say asphyxiation. Didn't really say the cause of death was the knee on the neck. He kind of equivocated a little bit, and he said there were other factors present, such as drugs in the system.
Yeah.
That gives Eric Nelson a lot of room to play with, right? Yeah. Because the state has to prove, not necessarily that Derek Chauvin intended to cause the death, but that he did cause the death, that his actions caused it, meaning something else didn't cause it, that there was no superseding causal factor. And so it was really powerful when some of the state's medical experts were able to come in and say, George Floyd died because of a low level of oxygen, because he wasn't able to breathe.
Well, yeah.
Sounds kind of obvious.
Yes.
But the reason that was important is because it made a stronger medical determination than Dr. Baker's report, which was initially released, back in May or June of last year, I think.
Okay.
So the state was able to really hammer that home with some of those medical experts. Dr. Tobin was one of them. He was the guy with the Irish accent from Chicago.
Yeah.
Really able to hammer that home to the jury that, no, drugs didn't cause this. It was the knee on the neck. He died from low level of oxygen because his airways were constricted. He wasn't able to take in enough air. That's what did it.
For you as an attorney, like for all of us that saw it, I've never watched the video, but I saw like bits like when it came out, and you just you hop online and it's like, whoa, there it is. And for people that just see it, they're like, oh, that guy killed that guy. Like that's what happened. Do you ever get flustered or frustrated like in court, like being like, this is going to take 4 weeks to hammer something home that we all know happened, or we all believe what we saw happened. Right?
Yeah. I've kind of joked with some of my family and friends lately. They've been asking, well, what's the prosecution going to say in their closing? I've kind of joked, saying, their closing should be probably about 10 minutes.
Yeah. How long is the closing statement usually?
Play the video and say, you saw what happened.
Yeah.
End of story.
Yeah. I mean,
why do we need anything longer than that? Right? It seems pretty cut and dry. But that would probably be reckless and irresponsible of the prosecution to do that.
Yeah.
They do need to remind the jury of the evidence that they heard and tie it to the elements of the crime that is going to be spelled out for them in the jury instructions. And show them, walk them through how they should be making their decision. Because the jury has to vote on, basically, and come to a unanimous decision on all the elements of the crime for each of the 3 charges. So watching some of the closing statements from the prosecution this morning, they've been very methodical. They've been very methodical throughout the trial. They were very methodical in their closing statement as well. And the reason they're doing that is they're guiding the jury and trying to say, hold our hand, here's how you're going to do it. When you go back into deliberations, this is what you need to do. So there is some method to their mayhem in being thorough. But yes, absolutely. Sometimes it gets to the point of overkill.
Yeah. But I mean, obviously, for every single jury member to get them on your side, you want to walk them through it. I get that. And was there any fear for like a mistrial at all during this whole process?
Yeah, absolutely.
When was that?
Well, for me, I think it was brought up. It was mentioned when there was testimony on, one of the defense experts suggested that George Floyd maybe died from, I think it was carbon dioxide poisoning from the exhaust from the tailpipe, because he was close to the tailpipe.
Oh, wow.
A little far-fetched, in my opinion.
Okay.
He's outside. Maybe if you're indoors, you have a better argument, but he's outside. Anyway, the state wanted to call a rebuttal witness to kind of talk about that. And it's a little late in the game to be doing that. And the state wanted to introduce an additional piece of evidence to show the level of carbon dioxide in George Floyd's blood.
Okay.
That creates all sorts of problems.
What?
Because at a trial, the state has to disclose all their evidence up front as the defense.
Oh, got it.
At trial, there's not supposed to be any surprise evidence. There's not supposed to be any surprise witnesses. Everyone has to be on the same page in how they prepare for it.
Yeah.
It was kind of late breaking news. And so there was some argument from the lawyers about, well, the defense expert brought this up,
Why can't we bring this up?
Yeah, why can't we rebut it? What's going on here? Like, who's to really blame for this being late breaking news, right? And so there was some talk and there was some fear on my part as well, and I'm sure with other observers, oh gosh, this is what's going to do it.
Yeah.
Why is this can't be happening. But I think that Judge Cahill reined it in and said, okay, these are the only things you can talk about, these very narrow issues. If any of you, or either of you, meaning state or defense, goes outside of this, it's going to be a mistrial. Nobody wants that. And so they stuck to the script. They got it in. They got what they needed to do. Both sides did.
Yeah.
And so I am far less concerned there will be a mistrial.
And for folks that don't understand what a mistrial is, what happens when there is a mistrial in a case?
It starts all over again.
It starts all over. Okay.
Which everybody wants to avoid.
Yeah. I think the world wants to avoid that. With a hung jury, what would happen if there was a hung jury?
Yeah, it starts all over again.
Starts all over again.
Yeah, a hung jury is rare. Okay. There are no time limits on deliberations.
Okay.
So when the jury goes to deliberate, they're given space and freedom, and in the sense that no one's going to be hounding them.
Yeah.
Give us an answer right now. They're sequestered. There's a bailiff outside the room. But no one's hounding them for a decision. The judge might politely ask, "Are you guys close? How you doing? How you doing?"
Yeah.
And that's not uncommon. The closer it gets to, let's say, 5 o'clock.
Yeah. Okay.
Everybody wants to go home. And they don't want to be waiting around if they're not going to come to a decision. So the jury has to be unanimous on their decision for each of the 3 charges.
Manslaughter 2, murder 3, and murder 2.
Exactly. They can be unanimous on any of those or none of, but if they're not unanimous on any of them, there could be a hung jury on that one.
Oh, okay.
But what usually happens in practice is the jury goes to deliberate.
Yeah.
They take an initial tally or vote. Where's everybody at? It might be 10-2. It could be 6-6. Who knows? But they're supposed to talk until they're 12-0 on whatever it is. So in practice, a hung jury is rare because it means that there are a few people that are just saying, I'm not changing my vote.
Okay.
But in practice, what happens is, let's say it's 11-1. The 11 are going to beat up on that one person.
Yeah.
Come on, what? Are you crazy? 11 of us all think this. What? What's going on here? How can we convince you to see it our way? Can we just be done with this and go home?
Because rarely one would beat out the rest of the 11.
Incredibly rare. Never happens. Only in 12 Angry Men, the
12
movie.
Angry Men. Exactly.
But this case, you got to remember too, the pressures to come to a unanimous decision are going to be greater because they're all sequestered.
Yeah.
Usually it's, well, I'm holding out because this is what I think. I'm still going to go home tonight and see my family, but no, if you're holding out, you're not seeing your family. You're not going home. You're staying in this sequestration. You're staying in this deliberation until it's done.
I want to go back to the toxicology thing because somebody said something that George had less than half the amount of fentanyl in his body for a DUI. What does that mean? Yeah,
I'm a little perplexed as well. Because in Minnesota there is no legal limit for fentanyl. For a DWI. The legal limit is 0, right? It's the presence of any controlled substance, except for marijuana, to get a DWI. So I don't really know, but certainly there are studies out there, medical studies, that have said or tried to quantify a level of fentanyl or whatever the drug is to say a person is definitely going to be impaired to operate a motor vehicle if they have this level of a drug in their system. But for a DWI, it's legal limit 0 for fentanyl.
I want to go back to what we talked about with the prosecution and the witnesses, the folks that were there that saw Floyd in his final minutes. Prosecution had witnesses for, I think, a week or a week and a half.
2 weeks.
Defense had witnesses for 3 days, a week?
It was about 2 days.
2 days, 2 days. Is that normal or is that, what does that mean? Sure. Just the quantity for either side.
Yeah, remember, it's the state's burden of proof. And the state puts their case on first. It's, the state versus Derek Chauvin. Yeah. So they have to present their case and convince the jury. So they call all their witnesses first. On the defense side, many of their witnesses that they would have called, had they gone first, probably would have been a lot of the same state witnesses. And so remember, the defense gets to cross-examine any of the state's witnesses. So they still get to question the state's witnesses, so there's no real reason to bring them back for the defense case. Mm-hmm. Now, what I thought was glaring was the lack of experts that the defense was able.
Yeah, that surprised me too. I was like, I thought you were going to bring out, everybody to merit these toxicology things or whatever Baker said in the beginning.
Right. And I guess there's a couple ways you can look at that. I guess the main way to look at it, I think, is it just shows that the science is not necessarily on the defense's side.
Yeah.
You can't find people to come in and attach their name to a certain medical conclusion.
And that's the thing as well. I mean, because everybody's watching this, if somebody were to come in and try to scientifically explain, why, he didn't die of any actions on Derek Chauvin's part, that's going to follow you outside of the courtroom, correct?
Oh, sure, absolutely. Yeah. And that would become part of your reputation. And do you want that as part of your reputation? Experts are supposed to come in and they are supposed to give their medical conclusions based on their training and experience, okay? Their scientific knowledge that they have about a particular issue. And if they have the appearance of just being a hired gun, they're going to lose credibility with the court, okay? Yeah. And so they're not going to be hired again as another medical expert. For example, one of the medical experts that the defense called is the former medical examiner from Maryland.
Okay.
Remember Freddie Gray in Baltimore?
Yeah.
He was the guy for that, okay? And he left under, let's say, not good terms for concealing evidence, for covering up for cops. And this is the best guy the defense can find to come in for medical evidence?
Wow, I didn't know that.
So again, I think it just goes back a little bit to the point of, the defense has to play the hand it's dealt. And it's been dealt a difficult hand to argue. And if this is the caliber or quality of experts that the defense can bring in, it doesn't bode so well for the defense. It doesn't mean that the lawyer's doing a bad job. It doesn't mean that, anyone is doing anything nefarious. It just probably means that the science and the medicine isn't on the defense's side, which is a good thing for the prosecution.
Yeah. Do you think that the roster of lawyers for the police defense that are on the police defense fund or whatever we call that will kind of decrease, or folks will be like, I don't know if I want to be a part of this?
It's a good question, and I don't know. I don't know what the answer is. I will tell you, I'm pretty sure that Eric Nelson is the youngest one on the roster.
Okay, that says something as well.
Yeah, the majority of the lawyers on that roster are Earl Grey, getting up there in age. They've been doing it a long time, and they're really good lawyers because they have been doing it a long time.
Yeah.
Some of those guys are going to retire soon. Tom Kelly is another one of the lawyers that was on the panel, and he was actually due up to take Chauvin, and he said, well, I'm retiring soon, so I can't do it. So, the police union is going to need to keep refreshing their roster of lawyers, and honestly, I do think after the Chauvin case, it's going to be difficult to recruit good lawyers to be on that panel.
And with that being said, so, and even with the Minneapolis Police Department, they're low in numbers, and it's from folks that I've talked to in that realm or industry, they've spoken about how tough it is to recruit. Now that this is kind of coming to light. I won't say this is happening now. This has been happening for some time, but it's hard to recruit. And so, what do you see happening for law going forward? Like when we talked about the new era at the U of M law school, probably the new era at the St. Thomas Law School. Like what do you perceive the future to be for attorneys going forward?
It's a good question, and I think it's a brave new world, and I don't really know. What I can tell you, though, in at least the criminal realm, it does seem that the new generation has shifted from more of a, we got to be tough on crime mentality to more of a, we need, compassion in criminal justice reform. And I think that you see that in places like San Francisco with Chesa Boudin as the DA.
Yeah.
Prime example,
He's 50s, 30-something, 40-something?
I think he's in his 40s.
Yeah, first DA to prosecute or you bring charges to a cop.
So you have people like that I think are going to be replacing the old guard in some of these prosecution roles. And Mike Freeman has had challengers before with a strong criminal defense background, and he'll probably, I don't know what he's going to do. I don't know that he's announced if he's going to retire or run for re-election or not, but certainly he will face challengers in Hennepin County. And I would not be surprised at all if whoever replaces him is a former public defender.
Okay.
And that's going to bring a completely different perspective to that office.
Well, in California, I mean, the new DA there, I think it was Los Angeles, was saying to do away with bail bonds and
getting rid of cash bail. Yeah, absolutely.
What does that mean to get rid of cash bail?
Sure. So,
just as a side note to what we're talking about, I was just curious about it because we got you here.
It's a good question. We have a system in Minnesota and in many parts of the United States where you just have to pay money to be released from jail while your case is pending.
Yeah.
The general idea is it's collateral. It means that you have some skin in the game by posting bail so that you come back to court. So you don't just fly the coop and go to Belize or wherever, you know? The problem is that rich people can afford bail, poor people can't. So guess who's sitting in jail?
Poor people.
Poor people, exactly. And the general idea is supposed to be about protecting public safety, right? So how is letting rich people out of jail who can afford bail protecting public safety any more than it is than keeping poor people in jail?
Yeah.
So if you're keeping low-level offenders in jail because they can't afford $78 or $300 or whatever it is, they're more likely to lose their job, their housing, whatever it might be, just because they're sitting in jail. And why are they really sitting in jail? It becomes a debtor's prison, more or less. So instead, in some of these places, Illinois, for example, they have eliminated cash bail, and instead they are putting people on conditional release. So for a higher level offense, they might have to wear an ankle bracelet. Okay. So the court knows where they are, knows what they're doing. If it's an alcohol or drug-related offense, they might be put on some level of testing. But they're not going to just keep people in jail because they can't afford it. Can't afford it.
Okay, so I want to talk about the murder 3 charge, and we have a thing called precedence. And Mohammed Noor was convicted of murder 3. A Minneapolis police officer killed Justine Ruszczyk. And my question is, if Derek Chauvin is brought up on murder 3, if he's brought up on murder 2 and murder 3, and then Mohammed Noor's appeal somehow is successful, is Derek Chauvin still in prison?
It depends.
Okay.
Sorry for the lawyerly answer.
No.
So, if Derek Chauvin is only convicted of murder 3,
yes,
and the Supreme Court overturns Noir, then Chauvin potentially could walk.
He's walking out. Okay, he potentially could walk out.
Potentially could walk.
Yes.
He would still have to appeal his case.
Got it.
And so that could take some time, right? But it is possible. I think that's kind of the nightmare scenario for a lot of people, that he gets off on a totally random technicality, right?
Yeah. Are they using the Mohammed Noor case in this trial?
Yes. So murder 3 was charged. The defense brought what's called a probable cause challenge, saying he can't be convicted of this, right? Judge Cahill agreed, and he dumped that charge. And the argument there was nothing that Derek Chauvin did was inherently dangerous to others, which is how the statute reads.
Yeah. And depraved of the mind as well.
And depraved of the mind,
Yeah.
right. But it was focused on the element of inherently dangerous to others.
Yes.
Well, Noir had his case decided by the Minnesota Court of Appeals shortly before Chauvin's case started.
Yeah.
And the Court of Appeals said, totally fine that Noir was convicted of murder 3.
Yes.
And the argument there was, well, nothing Noir did was dangerous to others.
Mm-hmm.
It was directed at a single person, the
Yeah.
unfortunate victim. And again, a little bit different facts and circumstances because Noir's case involved a gun and a shooting. Chauvin's case involves a knee. So it's a little bit different.
Yeah.
But frankly, personally, I think Cahill got it right that, a knee on a neck is not dangerous to others.
Yeah.
It's only dangerous to the one person.
Uh-huh.
What the Minnesota Court of Appeals said is that the act that can be dangerous to others can be targeted at one person.
Okay.
And so Cahill said, based on the precedent now set by the Minnesota Court of Appeals, although I frankly disagree with it, this is Cahill talking,
Yeah.
I have to reinstate the murder 3 because my basis for dismissing it contradicted what the Court of Appeals said.
Got it.
So now if the Minnesota Supreme Court says, yeah, it has to be dangerous to others, it has to be dangerous to a group of people, or the public, or whatever it is, that could overturn Noir, and then that could certainly have an impact on the Chauvin case.
Okay. And murder 2, what is the technical definition of that? Just
Yeah.
what you know offhand.
Yeah, so it's an unintended murder. You have to cause the death of another while committing basically a felony assault, so a third-degree assault.
And when we talked about that earlier, I was like, oh, that's literally what it sounds like, what happened. Like that was the, I'm like, oh, the murder 2.
Yeah. I
You know.
will tell you, before the trial started, I was a little skeptical because cops are allowed to use some level of force.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, we know that.
No, we know. We know.
We know that, and it's been upheld time and time again.
Yeah.
And so, I personally, I felt that, that use of force could be justified. We'll see what happens as the trial goes on, but after seeing the state's case, I'm more convinced that the jury will probably find him guilty of murder too.
And bringing in the lieutenant, the training officer, and Arredondo definitely impacts that.
I think so.
To have other cops say, that was too much.
He went too far. He went too far. He went too far. He went beyond how we train our officers. They said once George Floyd stopped resisting, once he was restrained, he should have stopped. And I think that's incredibly, part of it is just common sense, right?
Yeah.
But it's also incredibly powerful for the prosecution's case. To have cops come in and say that.
Is that rare?
Incredibly rare.
Okay.
Usually what happens in these cases is the cops come in and they kind of defend one of their own.
Yeah.
They say, well, we're all trained to react that way.
Yeah.
We are all authorized to use force when it's our life versus their life, something like that. Again, this one is totally different. There's no gun, there's no shooting, it's a knee on the neck, and you have the police coming in and saying, one of our own went too far.
And so, what they call it, the blue wall of silence, now that that's obviously not silent in this case, do you think that will change, the culture of law enforcement going forward?
No.
No? Why not?
I wish I could say otherwise.
Yeah.
Personally, I think, the men and women in blue just kind of decided we got to throw this guy under the bus to save ourselves.
Okay. And so, it could be because the world is watching as well.
It could be.
Yeah, and it's almost like integrity is doing the thing you're supposed to do even when nobody is watching.
Exactly.
So, not just when the world is watching.
And how do you defend the indefensible?
And we're gonna, for some people, indefensible is what we saw with Dante Wright. And folks are saying, oh, she said taser, taser, taser. They'll use the word accident, and others will use the word intentional. So the term indefensible could be different down the line, right?
100%.
You being a defense attorney, I just want to say this, just because folks are going to wonder, how does this sway the way that you look at it? You being a defense attorney, does it impact the way that you view this trial?
I think it does 100%, because this is my job, and this is what I do for a living. And so I'm looking at this trial through the lens of my job, through a fellow defense attorney in Eric Nelson. Sometimes thinking, well, would I do it the same way?
Yeah.
Things like that. Right. So I have that lens in this case, but I also try to just look at it as a human being and a resident of Minneapolis as well. I think though that as a lawyer, you have a duty to your client, and you have an obligation to put on the best possible case you can for them, to be a zealous advocate. The system only works in our adversarial system if both sides are zealous advocates. And so I think that personally, I have realized or come to understand that there are a lot of different things that you have to think about when being a zealous advocate. And you have an obligation to put on the best possible case for your client, but you also have to be conscious and understanding and considerate and compassionate about kind of some of the other things out there too. Because if you go too hard in the paint, it's going to be, it could backfire, right?
Absolutely.
And so kind of how we talked about, Eric Nelson needs to be likable to the jury. You got to think about those things. And I think that watching some of this, it has caused me to realize, I need to think about, to do my best work for my clients, I have to be conscious of some other things too. And that depends on the makeup of the jury. And in this particular case, which, I don't think I will ever be in a situation where I'm defending someone that's live streamed around the world, but consideration for Eric Nelson, you have to keep those things in mind. You have to think about who's watching and who's judging you.
Yeah, and then I'll wrap up on this. We talked about the future of law, talked about the future of policing. What do you see, yourself being a white attorney in Minnesota, and this being a very, very, this being an event that you can't really erase race from it. You can't take it out of it. And I remember you saying that the prosecution had to really tread lightly with that. What do you see as for the future of the city of Minneapolis, with law enforcement, with law, with everything? I mean, there's boards everywhere downtown. The National Guard is everywhere. Can the city, keep funding this? What do you see the future in the city of Minneapolis with this trial, with what happens with the verdict?
I don't know. I hope that positive change comes out of this. I hope.
What is positive change to you?
Positive change to me is more effective policing, more equitable policing, and a system that is able to root out bad apple cops, and is a system that is responsive to the people it represents.
And for some people that are thinking, well, bad apple cops, it's a bad apple system, what do you say to that?
Well, I guess what I'd say is that the system, I'm a believer in reform. I think that things can be reformed. I think that there are a lot of big challenges and a lot of big obstacles to do that, but I do think that reform can be had.
We talk about qualified immunity is going out the window in certain states and whatnot.
It's possible. Something really, really simple, such as requiring officers to live in the communities that they police. You can do that.
Brooklyn
you
Center,
can make
each of
that
their
change.
none of their officers
None
live in
of
Brooklyn
them.
Center.
None of them.
Yeah.
Now, they might live, just outside the city lines, Fridley, Champlin, which is where Kim Potter lives. But it's almost more symbolic than anything else, but it matters. Things like that matter because you're going to get cops that care more, that don't come in to the city from the outside and, cops come in and they see Minneapolis as a war zone, which it's our community, If you come in and treat the community in which you police as your community, you're going to have a different mindset as opposed to it being this place where warrior training is required. It's
warrior training. My goodness,
that's a whole another conversation.
And do you believe that the verdict is going to impact the way that policing, what happens with policing going forwards in the law?
I do. Win, lose, or draw. I do because I think that this has caused the police department, the city itself, the legislature, to take a long, hard look at how things have been done. Now, the challenge is going to be actually passing reform, okay? I think in Minneapolis, the city council has the political will to do that. At the legislature, I'm not sure there is bipartisan political will to get anything done.
No, it seems a little tough with some of the folks in the legislature. And the city council will definitely be a new city council come November. I mean, possibly a new mayor. Yeah, exactly. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us. I mean, I hope that this conversation can shed light to folks that are watching from the outside. So thank you for your time, Eric.
Thanks, Tucson. Appreciate everything.
Yeah.